Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on conducting effective workplace investigations, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We're so happy you can join us. My name is Deb Beto, and I will be your moderator today and be monitoring questions you may have during the session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we discussed can be found at the URLs currently shown on your screen. I will be sharing this URL in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. If you have audio difficulties or a telephone line goes dead during the call, hang up and call back again to the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Please feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you are using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear, and then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we will be online afterwards to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout, and the presenters will be answering questions at the end. And lastly, we have a number of webinars upcoming covering a variety of topics, including those listed at the Heffernan webinar website. In addition, we offer the mandatory Preventing Harassment training in English 3 times a year. With that, let's begin today's webinar, Conducting Effective Workplace Investigations. Today's interactive session will be facilitated by CJ Westrick. CJ Westrick, SPHR, has been in human resources management for over 25 years and has worked in companies with 25 to 1,750 employees nationwide. CJ received her SPHR, which is Senior Professional in Human Resources, national certification in 2002 and has a bachelor's degree in business management. She started HR Jungle in 2006 and targets companies who want senior-level HR expertise on a part-time basis. HR Jungle provides business owners and management teams workable solutions and hands-on assistance with employees and legal compliance through outsourced HR services. Take it away, CJ.
Hi, thanks, Deb, and welcome to everybody for this webinar. And get into there. What we're going to be talking about today are the benefits of an effective investigation, the types of complaints that you may have to investigate, and then 10 steps to conducting a successful investigation. So we're going to pop with our very first polling question. Deb?
Okay, and CJ, you are all of a sudden just starting to echo, so I don't know if there's anything that can be done, but just wanted you to know. Okay, our first polling question is in progress on your screen. How many workplace investigations have you conducted? The choices are none, 1 to 5, or more than 5. And we've already got about 60% of the people that have voted. I'm going to wait until there's about 80% because I want to make sure that everybody is participating and staying attentive here today. So CJ, the answers that we are getting are 24% say none, 41% say 1 to 5, and everybody else says more than 5, more than 35% of the people.
All right. So, Deb, am I echoing?
Yes, you are echoing.
Okay, but that's because of my earpiece, so I'm going to take it out. All right, does that help?
Much.
Oops, I can't hear you, though. I'll figure this out. Hold on a second.
CJ, it really helps a lot when you take your earpiece out.
Okay, I know. I'm trying to figure out how to mute it. I don't ever have to mute it, so bear with me.
Well, you sound good right now.
Do I? Okay. So we'll try and keep it like that and see if, just let me know if it starts echoing again. All right, so when we're looking at investigations, we have to determine what happened. And we also then have to deal with problems early. If we're dealing with like a sexual harassment investigation, then you can't leave it go for a couple of weeks or something like that. You need to be able to work promptly on the situation so that you can get a resolution before everybody kind of goes crazy about it. You're looking to enforce company policies and obviously protect your company from lawsuits. And you want to also encourage people to report when there's something going on that does need an investigation. A lot of times the company, especially if it's a public company, is going to want to avoid bad publicity. So that's also a reason for dealing with it early on and getting a resolution. And you want to build employee trust. If I make a complaint because somebody's harassing me, I want to know that you're going to handle it. So there's different types of complaints. Formal complaints, that's going to be based on what you've got in your policy. And, are you telling them who they should report to if they've got a problem? And you have a complaint form legally in California, at least, and probably some other states. You can do a complaint in either just a verbal format or you actually have to write it out. If you're in a state where they don't require or you can't require it to be in writing, usually what happens is you accept the verbal complaint and then you write it down and have them confirm this is what they've told you. And because sometimes people, either their English isn't that great or they just don't feel like they're a good writer. There's different reasons a person might not be comfortable writing it down. So always offer the verbal with you then basically transcribing it. And take a look at what you've got available as far as form and the kinds of questions you're asking. So another kind of complaint is the old classic off the record. This is when an employee maybe is comfortable with a supervisor that's not their own, and they even go to lunch occasionally, or even just in the office, someone to come up to you and say, okay, I want to talk about something, but it needs to be off the record. Well, if it's a harassment complaint, you are still legally required to have it investigated. So, at most what you want to do is to take that kind of complaint and offer to kind of walk them through with whoever you need to make the complaint to, and to that it gets handled. There's the anonymous one, which is kind of a weird one. You might get a phone call or an unsigned note and stuff like that. These are hard to deal with because you don't have anyone to talk with about it. You have to be able to talk to somebody to investigate. And then you've got those that come through the normal channels where a manager or supervisor who should be out there paying attention to what's going on in your company. They are the company's eyes and ears. And so, they should be the ones to able to pick up on rumors or gossip or hear somebody, talking about something that should be investigated. And it's important that they understand your process and how it goes, how it works, who is the ultimate person responsible for an investigation in your company. It's not going to be every manager out there. If you're dealing with an harassment investigation, there's legal requirements of that person's skills and experience in order for them to qualify as a manager. So you need to be able to recognize what it is that you want them to do in order to control it. So we've also got, there's a lot of types, aren't there? We've also got what we call the indirect complaints. This is the kind of thing that comes up when you're having a disciplinary meeting with someone and they're suddenly, well, it's not my fault. This person's doing this or this over here. And that's still information you need to take and deal with. I've seen several times where somebody who's now leaving the company feels the moment is now to be honest. And they'll start telling you all the stuff that they've witnessed and experienced while working with you. Ideally, you don't get a lot of those simply because it means that it wasn't dealt with while they were still working. But if someone is saying something, even if you think it might be just vengeful, you need to check it out and figure out what is happening that causes them to do this kind of thing. Because a lot of people, when they leave, it's based on their performance, not related to other things going on in the company. Workplace observation. This, I call this my double take kind of thing. What I found is if I'm walking down the hall or something like that, and I see or hear something that maybe just doesn't quite register immediately, but a minute or so later, all of a sudden I'm looking back and thinking, wait, what was that? That's something you need to run through your mind and see, does it need to be investigated? Because whatever it was hit you as being wrong at that moment, even if you didn't mentally really identify it. And so you need to take the time to kind of think through what you just witnessed or heard that maybe should be investigated. Then the good old third-party reports. These are from the friend or the family member, the customer, or the vendor. And take a look at some of this stuff. When you get a complaint of some type from a customer or a vendor, you really want to pay attention to that, because regardless of what legally it represented, it really shows that somebody's paying attention and didn't like something going on in your company, and you want to get it fixed. Friends and family members, you kind of have to take that a little bit with a grain of salt, but it still probably needs to be investigated depending on what it is. I've seen where a wife will call in and say, I believe, Sally's having an affair with my husband and you need to stop it. And, something like that. So, there's an ulterior motive to their complaint, but it still may be a viable thing that you have to check into. So let's look at a sample here. James, I won't even say his last name. James was just a former IBM VP. He was awarded $3.7 million in 2014 after a Connecticut jury decided that the then 61-year-old employee was wrongly terminated because of his age. And the judge harshly criticized IBM's internal handling of the age discrimination complaint that he had made before, he was let go. And when the HR investigator had concluded that the executive was treated fairly, the judge said the HR report was one-sided and blocked IBM from submitting it as evidence at trial. So basically it was the judge is saying nothing you did is worthy of being in trial, that you tried to do anything. But he specifically noted that HR failed to include evidence favorable to the employee, including his performance reviews. So look at the whole picture. It's rarely just one-sided. When somebody makes a complaint, you're supposed to take that and look at the whole picture when you're investigating. So, this is a perfect example of a judge not believing what the company did because the company did it so badly. And so recognize that as, if you're the investigator, you have a vital role. You are the fact finder, and you need to make sure that you're protecting the company by doing a very thorough investigation. So when you've done an investigation, take a look at it. Does it look one-sided? There's hardly anything in the employment law rules that will go with a one-sided viewpoint of anything, whether it's an agreement, whether it's an investigation. So take a look. Make sure that you've been fair to all parties and take a look at it. If you're the HR person and you're doing the investigation, that is your role. You are the fact finder. And it can't be, based on, oh, I know my boss would like me to do this or come to this type of decision. That isn't up to you. Your role as an investigator is to present all sides. So when we look at the 10 steps to a successful investigation, we've got determining the issues to investigate. What exactly was the real message here? Then to take, immediate action if necessary. If this is a big harassment issue, maybe you need to separate the people for a while the investigation's going on. Take a look at that. But you need to at least get in there right away, even if you're not ready to fully take on the investigation, to at least prevent whatever's going on from continuing. You need to appoint the right investigator. You need to plan the investigation, conduct fair interviews, gather everything up, evaluate it, and then you take action. And you document along the way, and ultimately you should have a complete report for your company. And then you follow up, make sure things were taken care of. So when we're looking at the issues to investigate, we've got how serious was this misconduct? Because something was happening. So how serious is it? Because that makes a big difference on what, I'll say, what level investigation you go into. And, is there a potential here for a lawsuit? Or, that it, because it was, illegal versus just inappropriate at the time or something like that. Is this a whistleblower that requires like special handling? Is it a true violation of your company policy? So look at, your harassment policy, your code of business and ethics, your non-retaliation. These are the areas that most often you get the complaints about. And is there a dispute over what happened? I've done investigations to where both people denied, both the, it was like a third party made the, we'll call it accusation that this had gone on, and yet both involved with it denied it. So you need to kind of who's right in all this. But have you had similar complaints of this type? Make sure that you're following and being consistent with how that investigation went, or if it wasn't done well, make sure that you're focusing on doing it correctly. And a lot of I've seen to where you can almost use, like if you look at as far as the documentation, work it up and everything like that. But again, you scale the size, the investigation itself to the size of the problem, which is why it's important to determine just what is the problem.
TJ, you're starting to echo again.
Okay, well, next time we do a question here, I'll try and figure out how to turn off my volume on this. So, sorry. And so when we talk about taking immediate action, we want to protect the employees. Make sure that the person who complained doesn't have anything negative happen to that person. And you may have to, if they're complaining about their supervisor and it's serious enough that, okay, they shouldn't be together, supervisor on a paid suspension while the investigation goes on, or something to make sure that it stops right then. And so it kind of depends, again, what is the problem, what is the issue. And you want it, because if you go and take the person who made the complaint and you do something with them, oh, let's go put you in this little dark corner over here, be perceived as retaliation, making the complaint. So you don't want to go there. You need to make sure that what you're doing really doesn't negatively affect the person who made the complaint. And you also want to protect the company, which is one reason to at least look at it, see if action necessary, or if just investigating will be sufficient. And paid time off for the complaining employee, or transfer if it's strictly just an employee and their supervisor who aren't getting along. There's just no way to fix this. But a lot of times you're not really going to want to transfer them out, because that just kind of goes sideways on you sometimes. I think usually just some paid time off for one or the other person in order to have time to investigate and correct the matter is usually the most common, I think. So let's move to our next polling question.
All right, let's launch that. So the polling question: some things to consider when choosing an investigator include, select only one, gender, impartial, capable of testifying, or all of the above. And TJ, your audio sounds mostly good. It's just once in a while we get this little echo, and
okay.
that
does this sound better? Does this sound any better? I clicked a button that hopefully muted my earpiece.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll keep my fingers crossed then.
Okay. So we've got about 64% of the people voting. I want to wait till we're close to 80 at least, because I want to make sure everybody has a chance to participate. So 0% are saying gender, 33% say impartial, 2% say capable of testifying, and about 65% are saying all of the above.
I think that was the third question, not the second question. Okay. I haven't talked about the answers to that one yet. All right. So assuming that this is number 3, it is all of the above. And there's a lot of things.
Do you want me to launch the other question?
No, when
Okay.
number 3 comes up, you can go back to number 2.
Okay.
We'll
Sorry about that.
just switch them around. And
Okay.
so when you're looking at the investigator, one of the most important things, I believe, is that this person is perceived as impartial. A lot of times, a lot of companies have to bring in someone from outside in order to obtain that impartiality. And if you're working with your law firm, which you probably should in order to keep this under client-attorney privilege, then they may actually have an investigator that they would prefer you use. And so it kind of depends on what your own experience has been. If you're the HR person in the company, sometimes that's not really perceived by all the employees as being impartial, and because they know that you're answering to the big bosses. So it is important that whoever is doing this is impartial, or you may not get as much honesty out of the people that you're interviewing. And ideally, it's someone who understands what the complaint is about in the sense of subject matter expert. If it's something on a fraud case or discrimination, somebody who actually understands what that is. Where an HR person might know more about discrimination, they might know less about fraud. And so there again, you want to make sure it's not just one person fits all the scenarios, because it won't always happen that way. And that it's someone who's capable of taking action, or at least recommending what action should be taken, and that has really good interviewing skills. In California, if you're looking at sexual harassment investigations, the law specifies only three types of people that can do an investigation: an attorney, a private investigator, or an internal person, an employee of the company who is properly trained. And actually an outside HR consultant like myself can't just come in and do it on my own. I actually have to go in under the umbrella of a law firm because of the way California law states that. So make sure that you've got somebody who really fits the criteria of what you're looking for, and that has really good interviewing skills. And even though, like if on a sexual harassment case, a private investigator might not know the laws about sexual harassment, they do learn good interviewing skills. And the gender. If you've got a very sensitive situation, the gender might actually make a difference when you're having to do the interviews. And that is somebody who's going to be able to hold up in court for the company. So that means somebody whose background looks, fairly flawless as far as being someone who could be, a witness, and to take a look at, there's a lot of pieces go into it. And, sometimes I haven't actually had this experience personally, but it might be a team approach where you've got someone who's asking the questions, someone else who's taking the notes. Although when you add, the more people you add into an investigation as far as the interviewing part, it gets more intimidating because now they've got two people. So if you had someone taking notes, I would have them sit kind of way back, even away from the table possibly, so that they're not looking like they're part of that picture, and you can keep eye contact with the person you're interviewing. I know a woman who does a lot of investigations, and she takes notes herself on her laptop, but she keeps her laptop on her lap because she feels it makes it less obvious she's taking the notes. And she's just really learned to be really good at keeping it on her lap and typing away and maintaining then the eye contact with the person she's interviewing. So, but that takes a lot of practice to get to that point. Then, whenever possible, again, impartial, because that is really important. And as I mentioned, it has to be someone who fits the qualifications or the type of investigation. And it's like in California, and you might look in your own state. California has a business and professions code section under the California laws. So you might look and see, what does your state have? Does it have anything? If not, then you're a little bit freer to choose who that might be. But I think instead, then you rely mostly on just the impartiality. Ask yourself how others will perceive it. Because while you might feel impartial, like I said, if you're an HR person in the company, often I have found the employees don't really feel that that HR person is as impartial as that person feels they are. Was that complicated enough for you? So now you have to go into step 4, which is to plan the investigation. What do you know? You know what the complainant has told you. Do they have anything else that you can use? You know, it's like, did they give you a list of witnesses? Do they have any documentation? What do you still need to find out to get a clearer picture of what, you know, you believe may have happened, or at least what they believe happened? And so look at that. Who has the information, and what's the best way to get it? So you're looking at, you know, potential witnesses. You know, you need to figure out what order to follow. It's like, who would be the primary witnesses, and then go downhill from there. What kind of questions? You want to have your questions up front, ready, at least some basic ones. You don't want to have this planned out questionnaire that allows for no nuances anywhere, because some of those questions you're going to ask will come up based on what the person's telling you, where you're having to dig deeper. And a questionnaire is not going to know to go deeper for you. So look at that, and you have to let their manager know that you'll be pulling, you know, this person or that person away for an investigation. But you also make sure that you're keeping it as confidential as possible, regardless of what the investigation is, because you don't want to taint somebody's reputation with perhaps information that was bogus. And, you know, so you don't want it to negatively affect their reputation or their employment with the company if it turns out to be false information that you've picked up on. Then you have to figure out where and when to conduct the interviews. Usually in a company, it's going to be a conference room, ideally one where you don't have this big window that you can't block so everybody can see what's going on and they're trying to do lip reading. You need to schedule, you know, the interviews. You need to anticipate worst case scenarios. What's going on here? You know, when you're looking at a location, consider that some people may get very emotional during this. So that's again why you want to be able to make sure the window's got blinds on it or something like that. And, you know, how are you going to go about this? Sometimes you may, as the investigator, might need to do a little role playing with someone to see, does this make sense? You know, am I going in the right direction here? And, you know, get advice. Talk to an attorney, because they can help. You know, help you with the kind of questions. Talk to a consultant. Even if you're a publicly held company, the PR firm's going to want to get involved, and senior management, because if this goes badly and ends up with a lawsuit, most times CEOs or the people at that level want to know what's going on and can, you know, prepare for it in their own way. And while you're doing the investigation, you know, and asking those questions, keep an open mind. It's really easy to make assumptions, like you really like the person who's made the complaint, and therefore, oh yeah, you know, it's like she or he must be telling me the truth. You have to remain objective, and you know, you don't judge, and you don't ask leading questions, you know, in the sense that, well, did Maria falsify her time card? Well, no, you want to get up to the, you know, a different way of wording that is instead you would ask, you know, did you and Maria discuss your time card last week? What did each of you say? And, you know, find out, you're looking for information. You're not trying to lead the way to the answers you want. And there was my very first client had a company I worked closely with in another city up in LA. I'm in San Diego. And they asked me, it's like, oh, they've gotten a sexual harassment complaint. Would you talk with them? And it's like, sure. Well, 3 days went by. I didn't hear anything. So there we go with the timely. So I talked to my client. It's like, I haven't heard anything. It's like, oh, never mind. They've taken care of it. Well, 3 months later, I get another call from my client. Oh, you know, it's back. Can you talk with him? It's like, okay. So we scheduled a phone call with I don't even know who I was in, and there was like 5 of them in the company that were in the room on this phone call. But I know it was like the CEO, the CEO, CO, CFO, VP of HR, and I can't remember who the 5th person was. But as soon as we get on the phone, and I'm first talking with the CEO, very first thing he says is, he didn't do it. No, actually he said, the boy didn't do it. And I'm like, oh no. It's like, how do you know this? He told me. Okay, let's back up and see what happened the first time. Well, it turned out they had, this is so classic of the stuff we've already just talked about. It's like they had a woman who filed a complaint against a coworker. They removed the woman who filed the complaint, and at the time they had like 5 different offices, and they put her in a different office and in a different position, in a supervisory position that she'd not had before. Well, and then, they kind of just ignored it. And this was advice from a business law attorney. And so they did talk to an attorney, but this was in California. So in California, you really need to talk to an employment law attorney, because we've got so many employment laws here that you need someone who specializes and understands this kind of stuff better. And some states you won't have people specializing in employment law, but there are a lot of them out there if you look around, and they're going to give you the better advice. So anyhow, what had happened 3 months later now, what brought this back to everyone's attention was they had consolidated all their offices. And now when I actually went up there at one point, and what they had was this floor of a huge building, and it was like a sea of cubes, and they were the little short cubes. So it really did look like just this sea of cubes with just the outer offices. And they had managed, when they consolidated these offices, to put these 2 people in cubes facing each other. And so now the woman's like, well, I don't really think anything happened. And meanwhile, the company's saying, okay, we put her in a supervisory position, but now 5 out of the 7 people she was supervising have resigned because of her. So it wasn't a good move for them either. So you really need to like open it up. This is, where a company did not keep an open mind. They just took the first comment they received and ran with it. And, and that's, where you can get into a lot of trouble. And so you want to be able to keep an open mind, ask questions that are asking for information that's happened, but not that's regarding what the outcome is. If in this slide, if we're looking, for fraud because we believe Maria falsified her time card, flat out asking that question isn't going to give us the background we need to be able to say we did a full impartial investigation of this and asked people, who knew anything about, do you regularly see her clocking in and out? Depends on what kind of timekeeping system they were using. But you're looking at all that kind of stuff. Are there records that show when they're on the computer or in whatever system you're using that also show some of the timing, that maybe she logged out of her system at 3 o'clock instead of the 5 o'clock she put on her time card? Could she have been doing something else during that time? So you really want to look at the bigger picture. Don't just assume you know the answers. All right, so whatever polling question we didn't ask, let's ask this one.
Okay. All right, so let me launch this one. When conducting an interview, select one of the best answers.
Nope, it's the types of complaints you should investigate.
Okay, so let's see. Types of complaints you should investigate. You and I will need to review the list after we're done with this, TJ. Okay, types of complaints you should investigate include off the record, anonymous, reports by managers, or all of the above. So we've already got like 55% of the people voting. So you guys are getting a lot quicker. Thank you very much. And we've got 100% of the people saying all of the above.
All right. And even after I clouded their mind with other steps, they remembered that. Great. All right. So now we've got a lot of slides here about conducting fair interviews. So you want to, again, you made up your list. You've got what we'll say is the perceived victim, the, accused, and we have hopefully maybe some witnesses, but a lot of times you don't. So you're looking at that. And when you're interviewing the people, you're really looking to try and get a good sense of whether or not they're a credible person. Maybe, maybe your perceived victim is someone who, and this is one reason that a lot of times an investigation won't happen, is because, they're a drama queen. She always comes and makes complaints about one thing or another. We just ignore her. Well, you can't. But, it's the person who cries wolf. Maybe that person doesn't have as much credibility now, but it doesn't mean they might not still have a viable complaint. So, but that goes into the whole, part of this is to take a look at that, who are your witnesses and what did they witness? Taking a look at that kind of thing. And you're going to provide a brief description about what the situation is. And you only kind of explain the allegations themselves as needed. So this is the type of thing where you're like, okay, we have a claim that this person, made some comments to that person. Did you witness this? And what did you witness? Did you hear them say anything? So you don't want to come right out and say, it's like, did Billy say, she should have sex with him? And, that's not where you're going, because again, that's leading. So you want to be able to explain the situation as briefly as possible as to why you're conducting the interview. And you always want to thank the person, for their time. Thank you for coming in, this won't take very long, and stuff like that. So you kind of explain why they're being interviewed. Sally said that, you might have witnessed this, so we're just trying to find out if you did or not. And really, it doesn't help you to interview someone who isn't truthful, because it just muddies the picture. So, if you really want to help in this situation, telling us the truth and exactly what you saw or heard or didn't see or hear, is all I need to know. And explain that you as an investigator will not come to any conclusions until the whole investigation is complete. And then you can talk about the investigation process. And usually that part of that is going to be to make sure that they understand you would appreciate, you can't necessarily always require it, but you would appreciate them keeping this confidential until the investigation is complete. When you're doing it, as I said, you want an opening statement. So this is something you do want to write out, because you want to be clear as to what it is you're doing and have it be very clean. And otherwise you kind of get in front of one person or the next, and pretty soon your story's changed a little bit. There's no reason this can't be written out, because it's explaining what you're there for. And so really look at that and see what it is that, makes sense, that doesn't lead anybody in the wrong direction, but explains what, that the fact that you're investigating, the law requires you to investigate, or maybe just say, we've spoken with our attorney and they said they recommended that we investigate. So it kind of depends on what the investigation's for. But you're looking at this kind of thing and trying to give them something up front to work with. And then you're also wanting to make sure that all the employees and the witnesses, everybody surrounding this, that there will be no retaliation. Not only do you need to remind them that they should not be retaliating, but that it's company policy, if it's part of harassment, definitely company policy. But look at your whole complaint process. Do you have anything that talks about retaliation if it's not specifically about harassment in some fashion? And, because the workplace investigations can go in a few different directions. A lot of them, yes, are about harassment. But, it is important that they understand what retaliation looks like and how to avoid it, and to report it if they're noticing it. And again, as I mentioned, you're looking to keep this just as confidential as possible. So you tell, each witness is going to be told maybe something different, because you're only going to tell them what they need to know in order to get your information out of them. And, if you have a confidentiality agreement, make sure they've signed it in, beforehand. Ideally, if you have a non-disclosure or confidentiality agreement of some sort, they've all signed it when they were hired or every time it was updated. But take a look and see what it is you've got and that you need to remind them about. And the details about the investigation. People will talk. I mean, it's really hard to control that, but try to let them know that the investigation can't be as truthful and honest and impartial if everybody knows what's going on. So, kind of like, please keep this to yourself. You'll know when the investigation is done. We'll let you know that it's over, something along those lines. But to, tell them who they are authorized to talk with. Maybe, they're uncomfortable with what's going on because they were a bigger piece of it. And so maybe there is somebody that you can refer them to, someone else in HR or the HR person if they're not the investigator, that they could come talk with about this. And, you've got to set a good example by being very careful on what you're saying and making sure that it's being held in a private location, so that, you know, I've gone in as when I worked inside as HR person, where just I got in the habit of closing doors. And I went in one time to this director's office. We were planning to have lunch, so I went in, closed the door, and it's like, okay, so what are we thinking for lunch? You know, blah blah blah. When I get done with this conversation, I open up. All of his people are standing outside the door. Who's in trouble? What's going on? Because I'm HR and I'm in a closed office. So recognize what that looks like to people. That's one reason I actually started closing doors all the time, because like even to my own office, I would always close the door, but I had a window and people could see if I was on the phone or had somebody in there. And the message out there was, if I'm not, you know, if you don't see me on the phone or with someone in my office, walk on in. And what happened was people were freer to come in and talk with me, because they finally got the clue that nobody was going to ask, oh, what did you go talk with her about? That it wasn't some big private thing. And, you know, so kind of think about that in general when you're doing stuff, but in the interviewing process, that's part of it too. People are going to say, oh, what they want from you, you know, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, you need to try and kind of hold that down. And, you need to, you know, keep in mind the National Labor Relations Act is still blocking some conversations in different ways. So again, talk to, you know, your attorney about what you can ask, what you shouldn't, you know, what is considered nowadays a violation of the confidentiality of an investigation. So ideally, you start with the easy questions when you're interviewing. And, you know, you want to put the employee at ease. I mean, that's also one reason you kind of have that little statement up front, just so they immediately know what's going on and how it's going to be dealt with. And, you know, and if their reaction seems a little odd, you dig a little deeper. You know, if they're more upset or more casual than you expect, ask more questions. Because most people are slightly nervous in this, you know, particularly if they're being held, if they're being accused, or if they're being a witness, they're worried about, oh gosh, do I even remember what was said? Stuff like that. So you want to kind of make them feel comfortable, but pay real close attention to their reactions and recognize whether that's a clue for you to be digging a little bit deeper on it. Keep your opinions to yourself. Watch the tone of your voice. Do not throw out surprise or dismay about something they say. You know, it's you know, you might nod slightly just to show you're paying attention, but you don't say, oh, that was just awful. How can you bear it? You know, things like that, or how could you do that? You want to be very careful with the message you're giving out there in your verbal and nonverbal displays. And, you know, it's like, and again, you know, keep your opinions, don't lead them. You know, can you confirm Daryl hit Jeff on the loading dock yesterday? Well, he's a friend of Daryl, so he doesn't want to get him in trouble. So does he say no? You know, and it's more, you know, did you work? Did you see anything unusual? Tell me what you saw. Did you see an incident between Daryl and Jeff? So lead into it. Don't throw it out there and wait for it to just bounce around on the table while this person's trying to figure out what to say. And again, keep an open mind. Recognize you may not know what they're going to say, and you can't assume that they're going to say what you thought they were going to say. And again, for each of these people, you know, do you have any other corroborating information, you know, evidence of any kind? You're looking for things like emails, text messages. You know, people text so much these days, and they don't realize how much that can be pulled into court cases. Even emails. I mean, now there's laws saying you can't go in and throw away a lot of emails regarding something that happened, because it could be called into court. And, you know, you're looking to verify dates and timelines. When did this happen? Which is another reason why the timeliness is so important, because even 2 weeks later, it can be hard for people to remember what happened. Gosh, was that, oh, that was on Wednesday? Oh, what did I do? I mean, I don't remember what I had for lunch 2 days ago most of the time, unless it's on my calendar that I had a meeting. And so recognize that the longer the time goes by, the harder it is to get really truthful, honest information, mostly because people just forget. You know, it's like when you look at the police, they know that the witnesses are always going to be unreliable, because they can't, you've talked to 5 people out there, oh, hit and run. What color was the car? Well, they've got all different colors coming at them. What type of car? All different types. So recognize that it's, it happens a lot. And it's because people get nervous, or because they've got their own bias. Like I said, maybe this guy likes Jeff or likes Daryl more, and it may change how they viewed what happened. So your job as an investigator is to really focus on the facts. You've got to be objective. You've really got to take a look at it. It's the old typical who, when, where, what kind of thing. Think of like the journalists, you always hear that they've got to go out and find the facts. They're not supposed to be going out there with their own opinion, although we know what happens. But you want to take a look at all of this because you want to, present this to your attorney or to your senior management as being very complete, very accurate. And so you really need to take a look at everything. When you're talking about the other witnesses or evidences, did you ask each person? That's part of that questionnaire that you're developing up front, so that you remember to ask everybody the same thing. Did anyone else see or hear this? Did you tell anyone? Did you take any notes after this happened? Some employees will actually go back to their desk and make a note about this, thinking that they might be called up as a witness at some point. It's surprising. I am continually surprised at what I find out there. And so, don't think that they haven't. Ask about it. Do you have, any concerns about continuing to work while this investigation is going on? And it's really trying to keep the person comfortable, trying to keep, a lid on the investigation. But all of it's going to depend on how well you do the investigation. So you're also looking about contradictions. So, why do you think Sarah would say that if it weren't true? Maybe there is a bias going on in there that made this person complain or say something negative about this other person. You're looking to see that, why do you think they're bringing this issue up now? Is it because they just lost their promotion, or didn't get a promotion they thought they were going to get? So now they're starting to point fingers at different people for things. You're trying to look at this and, be objective, but pay attention. Whether it's their body language, the contradictions in things they're saying, are they saying, something? If you actually spend like an hour on an investigation with someone, you can circle back, and sometimes what they say the second time to the same kind of question won't be the same. And why is that? Before, this is what you said. If you ever watch any kind of cop shows on TV, you see this happening when they get into court. Well, according to your testimony before, this is what you said. Oh, well, I didn't mean that. Oh, so you lied then, not now. And granted, you're not going to call these people liars or have them on the stand. You're wanting to be comfortable, but you are trying to find the truth. So if you're seeing conflicting statements, try and find out what is the real thing that happened and who's being more honest about it. When you're concluding the interview for each person, ask them, especially for the complaining employee, it's like, what, when since I usually interview the complaining employee first, it's like, well, what would you like to see happen? I actually had one. It's like, I would like to have their forehead branded. And so it's like, okay, that's not going to happen. So, but we will find something that's, acceptable, because I think it's important to know where their head is. You don't want to make any promises. You explain like what the follow-up is, what you're going to be doing next, stuff like that. And you can, promise them that the company will take appropriate action. It may not be what they want, but it will be appropriate to what the investigation finds out. And you can ask the interviewees to contact you if they've got questions, things like that. Say it's like, fine, if something comes up or you think of something else, please, contact me. Or if, they start to feel any kind of retaliation, or they just have questions in general about the investigation, make yourself available to them. And, because you want to hear everything that's going on about this, that's your point. Remember, you're the fact finder, AKA investigator. So let's do our last polling question.
All right, so our last polling question. When conducting an interview, Select one of the best answers. Make a quick judgment call. Start the interview with difficult questions. Keep your opinions to yourself, or all of the above. So, CJ, we did have one question come up, actually a couple of questions come up, and I think you answered one, but I'll just have you clarify. Do you have to tell the complaining employee what action has been taken to stop the alleged harassment?
Not specifically, but you do want to let them know that to at least let them know that the investigation has now concluded and the company has chosen which action they're going to take. So I would just, let them know something's happened, but they don't have the right to know, well, we wrote him up and here's what we said, or something like that.
Okay. And should you ask the interviewee for a written statement at the end of the interview?
Well, you're going to take notes while it's happening because you don't want to be able to rely just on your memory. So typically what I'll do, even though I've still got typos in it, I will kind of talk to them and say, here's what I've typed up as my notes from this. Does this sound accurate?
Okay, excellent advice. Okay, so we have 93% of the people say keep the opinion to yourself, and 8% say all of the above.
Okay, it is C. It's keep your opinions to yourself. You don't want to make a quick judgment call. Remember, you're supposed to be impartial, waiting until the investigation is concluded before a decision is made or even your opinion of it is made. And you want to make anybody you're interviewing comfortable. So you don't start right off with, did you see him hitting? It's more like, oh, how are you doing? I mean, sometimes it's just like a couple of little casual questions of, how are you doing? How long have you worked in the warehouse? Something like that. Something to kind of get them a little bit friendly with you so that you can get the truthful answers out of them. All right, moving on. So number 6. We are gathering all of the documents, all of the evidence we can track. You're going to be pulling out, your policies, copies of your policy, looking at the work history of the people involved, any prior incidences, what kind of emails. If you've got an IT people that work on, your computers, whether it's an outside source or inside, you can still ask them to help you pull up any emails between these two people, something like that. There's a lot of people think that you can just go in and delete a bunch of these emails and they disappear. Not so much. You can take stuff off your computer, and there are things out there now that will still retrieve them. So things are not as deleted as a lot of people think they are. So this is where you may want to get your IT. If you know there's any potential for emails, get your IT department involved in finding those emails, even if they've been deleted. Any notes that people may have taken along the way, or just your own notes, obviously. Any text messages, since texting is so big, even maybe some of the social media postings. People, I'm constantly surprised at how much people will put out on social media. And, and so take a look there, if you've got access. You may not have access, in which case, depending on who might have access to it, you could even ask if it's something where this person mentions social media, would you, give me access to look at your account and see what is being posted in there. A lot of my clients now have cameras. They don't necessarily always record sound. Most of them don't, in fact, it's just video. And a lot of it's just for security and stuff like that. But take a look. If you've got cameras, do the cameras show anything that could help on this? That would back up there was at least a conversation going on at the time and date that the complaining employee mentioned, or were they nowhere around together during the time frame that it was said to happen? So look at everything possible out there that might be evidence. And keep in mind, depending on what state you are and stuff like that, which is another good reason to bring in an attorney, is it could be illegal for people to delete emails, even though we could retrieve them, it still can be very illegal to delete them if it's something that becomes part of an investigation. So once you've got all that stuff, now you have to evaluate it. What is the plausibility of this thing happening? Is there cooperation in some way? Is there consistency in what the stories are? And again, you're assessing credibility, and you may not be doing this alone. A lot of times what happens is the investigator turns over everything they've got to the attorney, and then the attorney works with senior management to decide what seems the most plausible, what, who's credible, stuff like this. And you might be allowed to give just an opinion based on, like, for credibility, how did they act when you were interviewing them? But you may not be part of that picture. It's like being part of a jury trial, but you're not let into the back room where they make the decision. And so recognize that, but that's also why you want to have your documents and your whole investigation recorded very properly so someone else can read it and make a decision from it. And there may be follow-up interviews if things, when you start looking at it, and this is kind of like when you're investigating and suddenly you realize, well, something's not consistent here. So maybe you have to call back one of the witnesses and probe a little bit more on it. Then it's time to take action. And you want to end the problematic behavior, whatever it was. And it may include appropriate discipline. It may be a termination, which to me is like all part of the disciplinary thing. It may be criminal prosecution, depending on how it is, or canceling. But, keep in mind, there's a lot of ways this can go. You're looking to right whatever went wrong. And you want to protect the employees. Make sure there's no continued harassment if that was part of it, or if there's a safety issue or the uncomfortable situation, whatever it was, you want it to stop. And you need to communicate then with all the people, at least, for the ones that are like the people, the person who made the complaint and the accused, even potentially the witnesses, just to say the investigation has concluded and the company is taking appropriate action. And if they ask, well, what is that action? It's like, I'm not at liberty to say. That's all you have to say. And that's really all you want to say, because you don't want to make this, if the person didn't get terminated or, charged with a criminal act, you want to still make it comfortable for everybody to work together. So saying too much can actually alter that. And you document it. Like I said, write it up. I've done them like police reports. He said this and that. She said this and that. Not just to, make it sound like I believed every word they said, but you're looking to do that. And then to follow up, as I said, go and let them know it's been resolved in some fashion. Monitor the situation after the fact. Look for retaliation, deal with whatever causes in the first place. Is more training needed? Do you need to have new or updated policies? Take a look at that and see what is it that you need to fix in there, and to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again. I know when it comes to harassment complaints, a lot of times it's a matter of just training. I've had a lot of employees who, it's like, oh, my supervisor yelled at me, so I'm in a hostile environment. Well, legally, that's not. Unless it's, that person's protected characteristic, and it's like there's a lot of other factors in there, but just the supervisor yelling at you one time isn't necessarily harassment in any form. It's just maybe a bad management style. So maybe what you need is to make sure that your managers have training on proper ways to communicate with their employees, or to be able to do, performance training of some sort. So kind of look and see what started this problem, and can we do something to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I think that's one of your big roles, not so much as an investigator, but if you're part of the HR, I think the investigator, you want to know these things from the investigator if you're HR. So if it wasn't HR doing the investigation, then talk to the person who did the investigation and say, did you see any or hear anything in there that made you realize we could do something to help prevent this in the future? And see what you get. It may be helpful to stop this, and you don't have to go through this particular kind of investigation a second time. So I will end now with opening it up for questions. Anybody?
Yes, we do have a couple of questions that came in. What if an employee is accused? What if the accused employee accused someone else of doing the same thing a year or so ago? Any difference?
Well,
in the investigation process?
It weakens it when they didn't say anything. But I think for me, if somebody told me that I was talking with, it's like, well, I wish you had said something at the time, because then we could have prevented it, and you wouldn't have necessarily thought that it was okay to do. And so, we'll put the note of that. I mean, a year ago, when you're talking, if it's harassment related, people have a tendency to kind of brush it off until it becomes something you just can't ignore anymore. And so I think it's more just, well, then, this is a good, reason to let us know when something happens in the past, if it happened to you, because again, with harassment, sometimes, it has to be unwelcome or it had to bother the employee. Maybe when somebody did it to this person, it didn't bother him. So he ignored it. It didn't matter. And it wouldn't have been true harassment. But now whoever's complaining does see it as harassing behavior. Different people, different time.
Okay. Should HR conduct all interviews, or is it okay for managers to do it?
I think it needs to be somebody specifically trained to do an investigation. So when you're talking an interview, if you're just talking to, because you're doing recruiting and the managers want to be able to interview people, that's fine. I think it's they need to be taught, what questions to, not to ask. But if you're talking an investigation, it has to be somebody who's been trained to do an impartial investigation, not just an interview.
Okay. And how do you handle the he said, she said situations where there are not witnesses and there isn't any clear proof that something did or did not happen?
It's really going to come down to credibility. If you happen to know both people or just listening to the stories, which sounds more likely that it happened, you're probably going to lean that way. That's the big challenge with the he said, she said kind of scenarios, is because there isn't any backup for it. And, mostly though, if you're talking to each of them and you realize that you can't really figure out who it is, then it's more like, okay, we couldn't really find any proof at all that this truly happened. But maybe both of them need to go through some kind of training. I wouldn't put them in the same training, like not in the same training room together to go through it. But maybe if it was like harassment related, you send them off to go through harassment again to better understand what is harassment from the person who complained and how to avoid it for the person who got accused.
Okay. And last question, what about actions that were never followed through with, but action is against policy?
I guess it depends on how the action appears. Because if you're talking that, okay, you're concluding an investigation and you're telling somebody, yes, the company took appropriate action, and maybe it was like decided on, but never done, it's going to be a company choice. The company's the one that's at risk. So if they don't want to follow through with the action that was determined appropriate for whatever happened, that's on their head. And, if something comes out of it and it ends up part of a bigger investigation at some point in time, that's going to come back to bite them, that they didn't do what they said they were going to do.
All right. And CJ, we do have one last question that came in. I'm sorry. When you invite a witness to talk with you, do you tell them why you are wanting to talk, or do you give them some time to think about it?
No, you bring them in and you read that opening statement, that kind of says, I'm doing an investigation and, I want you to see what you might know about this situation. And so that's when you're doing the, did you work in the warehouse last week? Yes. Well, were you working on Thursday? Did you see anything unusual happen on Thursday? So again, it's like you're leading them into it, but you start with that opening statement, which is why it's critical to draft it out, have it, solid before you start any of the interviews so that you know how to start the conversation, because that's always the awkward point.
Okay. So everyone, thank you for attending today's webinar presented by Heffernan. We will send information by email with instructions on how to access a copy of the presentation on our website. Thank you, CJ Westrick, for your time and expertise today. We hope all of the attendees, we hope all the attendees found today's webinar to be a valuable use of your time. Be sure to join us on May 7th for active shooter armed assailant response training for the DHS Run, Hide, Fight protocol. And thank you again, everyone. Have a very nice day.
Bye.